The wreck in the wasteland, the twin suns burned down on the endless dunes, turning the air into waves of heat. Ethan Cole trudged forward, his boots sinking into the soft sand with every step. He was alone, as always, dragging his salvage sled. Behind him, the metal frame squealing under the weight of scrap parts. The wasteland was quiet, except for the wind. But Ethan's trained ears caught something different, a low hum, faint, almost buried beneath the shifting sand. He stopped, adjusting his goggles, and scanned the horizon. There, far ahead, something massive jutted out of the dunes, the twisted tail of a crashed ship, its black metal glinting in the sunlight. Ethan's heart kicked in his chest. This was no ordinary wreck. The size of the structure meant it was a warship, and warships meant valuable parts, maybe even functioning tech. If he was lucky, he might be able to keep himself fed for months from this one find. As he got closer, the true scale of the crash revealed itself. Half the ship was buried deep in sand, but the other half rose like a jagged mountain, torn open from some violent impact. Fires had long since burned out, but faint lights still blinked deep inside the metal carcass. That was strange. Ships didn't keep power for this long unless something or someone kept it alive. Ethan climbed the slope of twisted hull plating, careful not to cut himself on the razor edges. His boots clanged on the black alloy as he stepped into the shadow of the broken hull. Inside it was cooler, the harsh light replaced by dim red emergency glows. The hum was louder here, mixed with the sound of air recyclers still barely running. Whoever built this ship knew how to keep it alive. He passed corridors filled with scorched walls and shattered consoles. The smell of burned wiring and alien chemicals filled the air. Then he heard it, not a hum, not the wind, but breathing, slow, labored, uneven. Ethan froze, his hand automatically reaching for the pistol at his side. No one was supposed to be alive out here. Following the sound, he moved deeper into the ship, stepping over fallen beams and shattered glass panels. The breathing grew louder until he reached a huge doorway, half collapsed with some effort. He pushed it open, the metal screeching in protest. What he saw made him stop cold. In the center of a ruined throne chamber, lying against a cracked column, was a figure unlike anything he had ever seen. Tall, armored in organic-looking plates that shimmered faintly in the dim light, with long silver hair spilling across her shoulders. Her face was sharp, regal, and even in her weakened state, she radiated authority. Ethan knew her instantly, though he had only seen her in distant hollow images. Queen Sorathia, ruler of the Zevrak Empire, feared across half the galaxy. Every instinct screamed at him to leave. If the Zevraks found him here, near their queen, they would tear him apart without question. But then he noticed the way her chest rose and fell, the faint tremor in her breath. She was alive, but barely. And behind her, the ship's main power core flickered weakly, warning lights pulsing in a slow, dying rhythm. Ethan cursed under his breath. If the core failed, the ship would lose life support, and she would suffocate within hours. He told himself it wasn't his problem. She was an enemy to humanity. Her empire had destroyed countless human colonies. Helping her made no sense. But Ethan wasn't the kind of man to walk away from a life he could save, even in enemies. He stepped forward slowly, her eyes fluttering open at the sound. They were a piercing violet, glowing faintly even in the dim light. Her gaze locked onto him. Sharp despite her weakness, human, she whispered, her voice low and filled with suspicion. What do you want? Ethan crouched down, keeping his distance. Your ship's dying, he said simply. I can fix it. But if I do nothing, you're gone in hours. She gave a faint, bitter smile. And why? What a human. Help me. Her voice cracked. With each word, Ethan didn't answer right away, his eyes scanning the core readouts across the room. Finally, he said, because I don't like watching people die when I can stop it. It wasn't a speech, just a fact. Her eyelids grew heavy. Her breathing shallow. Do as you wish. Scavenger. She murmured before slipping back into unconsciousness. Ethan moved quickly. Unpacking his portable repair kit, he checked the ship's core, a massive alien fusion engine, and winced. The damage was bad, far worse than he expected. But it was still fixable if he worked fast. He cut through damaged conduits, rerouted power lines, and patched coolant leaks. All the while, he kept glancing back at the Queen, making sure she was still breathing. The work was exhausting in the stifling air, but he didn't stop. Sweat dripped down his face, his arms aching from the effort. Minutes turned into hours, the low hum of the core growing steadier with each repair. Finally, the blinking red warnings shifted to a soft, steady blue glow. The life support systems kicked. Back to full power, a faint breeze flowing through the chamber again. Ethan slumped against the wall. Catching his breath, he looked at Saravia. Her chest rising more evenly now. She was still unconscious, but her color was better. He didn't know what he'd just gotten himself into, saving a queen especially. This queen could mean trouble, but walking away had never been an option for him. Outside, the wind began to pick up. A storm was coming. And Ethan knew one thing for certain. He wasn't leaving this wreck anytime soon. Asterisk. The storm outside howled like a living beast. Rattling the jagged edges of the broken hull, sand blasted against the metal. A constant hiss that filled the silent throne chamber. Ethan knelt beside the ship's main console, his fingers moving. Over strange alien controls, he had seen advanced ships before, but nothing like this. Zevrak engineering was elegant, almost alive, the systems pulsing faintly like veins under skin. Behind him, a faint groan made him turn. Queen Sarathia shifted, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment, she looked confused, scanning the chamber as if unsure where she was. Then, her gaze locked on Ethan, and the confusion turned to cold suspicion. You. She rasped, her voice rough but steadying. Ethan didn't look away. Yeah, me. The one keeping your lungs filled with breathable air. Her violet eyes narrowed, the glow in them brightening slightly. Do you know who I am? Human? She asked, her tone carrying the weight of command even in her weakened state. Ethan nodded. Oh, I know. Queen Sarathia, feared ruler of the Zevrak Empire. He turned back to the console, muttering, Doesn't change the fact that your ship's one bad spark away from becoming a coffin that made her blink, unused to anyone speaking so bluntly. Most beings either groveled or cowered in her presence. This human didn't. He was focused entirely on the machine. Not her crown. She shifted slightly, watching him work. What do you want in return? She asked, her voice low. Nothing, Ethan said. Still typing. Nothing. Her voice held disbelief. You are a ruler of worlds, and you expect me to believe you ask for no payment? Ethan paused, looking at her over his shoulder. I'm not here to bargain. He said simply, I fix ships. That's what I do, and yours needs fixing. Then he turned back to the console. Pulling a set of human-made tools from his belt, the silver instruments looked crude compared to Zevrak tech. But his hands moved with practiced skill. Sarathia's pride bristled. She had seen human technology before, always outdated, always inferior to Zevrak design. And yet this human worked with quiet confidence, like he understood the ships. Wounded systems on an instinctual level. She wanted to tell him to stop, to wait for her own engineers. But deep down, she knew no rescue was coming soon. The hum of the core shifted. Growing steadier as Ethan rerouted power, he muttered to himself. Tracing glowing conduits along the floor, Sarathia's eyes followed him. Noting the scars on his arms, the oil stains on his clothes. This was no soldier, no diplomat. Just a man who had spent years keeping broken things alive. Finally, Ethan. Leaned back from the console, wiping sweat from his brow. He glanced at her. "You're running on half power now, enough to keep the ship breathing. But not enough to fly." Her jaw tightened. Half power is not acceptable for the flagship of the Zevrock Empire. Ethan smirked faintly. Half power is better than no power. She straightened as much as her injuries allowed, her voice regaining its commanding edge. "You will restore full capacity." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You're in no position to give orders, Your Majesty." The words were bold, almost dangerous, but he said them without malice. Something about his calm defiance unsettled her. She tried to push herself up, but pain flared through her side, forcing her to sink back. Her pride burned hotter than the wound. Never had she felt so powerless, lying in her own throne chamber, while a human scavenger dictated the pace of her repairs. But as she watched him return to work, she noticed something else. Every time he passed the control panel, he glanced at her, checking if she was still breathing. It wasn't the gaze of an opportunist or a would-be assassin. It was protective. For hours, the storm raged outside, the ship creaking under the force of the wind. Inside, Ethan worked without pause, replacing shattered power couplings with salvaged human equivalents. At one point, a console sparked violently, and without thinking, he threw himself between the arc of electricity and the Queen. Taking the hit on his arm, she stared at him, shocked. "You risked injury? For me?" She asked quietly. He shrugged. "Wouldn't be much point fixing your ship if you got fried in the process." Her gaze lingered on him after that, her expression unreadable. Finally, when the storm began to ease, Ethan stepped back, flexing his sore hands. "That's all I can do for now," he said. Saradia looked at the glowing panels, the steadier pulse of the systems. It wasn't perfect, but the difference was undeniable. She took a slow breath, her voice softer this time. "You are competent, human." Ethan chuckled dryly. "I'll take that as a compliment." But before Ethan could speak again, a distant alarm began to echo through the ship. Sarathia's eyes sharpened. "We are not alone," she said, her voice suddenly fierce. Ethan glanced at the sensor readout, an incoming signal, several ships closing in fast. He didn't know yet if they were friends or enemies. But the way the Queen's expression hardened told him one thing: trouble was coming, and fast. The storm had barely passed when the first shadow appeared over the dunes. Ethan leaned over the console, watching the flickering sensor screen. 3 small crafts were approaching fast, their signals jagged and unmarked. They weren't Zevrak rescue ships, they were scavengers, and not the harmless kind. Queen Sarathia's gaze was fixed on the screen, her eyes narrowing. "They are scavengerators," she said in a low, dangerous tone. "They strip wrecks and kill witnesses." Ethan's lips tightened. "So, not here to say hello." The Queen tilted her head toward him. "You have minutes before they land." Human, Ethan grabbed his tool belt. But not for repairs this time. He pulled out a set of compact devices, human-made proximity mines, small enough to hide in his palm. "Guess I'd better make them regret the trip," he said. He jogged down the corridor toward the breach in the hull, its boots clanging on the metal floor. The air outside was still thick with dust, but the shapes of the incoming ships grew clearer with each second. 3 needle-shaped skiffs skimmed low over the dunes, their black hulls glinting in the weak sunlight. Ethan moved quickly, planting his devices in the sand just beyond the entrance. They were old designs, but reliable, the kind that would send molten shrapnel through anything moving too fast. Back inside, he dragged a pile of scrap metal into the entryway, creating a narrow funnel for anyone who tried to force their way in when he returned. To the throne chamber, Sarathia was standing now, leaning against the cracked column for support. Her face was pale, but her posture was still regal. "You think your little toys will stop them?" she asked, her tone sharp. "They're not meant to stop them," Ethan said, checking his pistol. "They're meant to slow them down long enough for me to pick them off." Her eyes flickered with something he couldn't read. "Perhaps you are more than a scavenger," she said quietly. He didn't answer. The sound of engines outside told him there was no time for talk. The first skiff landed with a hiss of sand and steam, its side doors sliding open. 4 figures in ragged armor jumped out, their faces hidden behind cracked masks. They carried a mix of alien rifles and jagged blades, moving with the hungry confidence of predators. They advanced toward the breach, and the first mine detonated. A flash of light and a deafening boom ripped through the air, sending 2 of the raiders sprawling into the sand. The other 2 stumbled back, firing wildly at the dark opening. Ethan crouched behind the scrap barricade, calmly taking aim. 2 shots, 2 clean hits. The masked bodies fell limp, their weapons clattering into the dust from inside the chamber. Sarathia watched him with an intensity she didn't bother hiding. His movements were efficient, without wasted motion. He fought like someone who had done this too many times before. Someone who knew exactly how close death could be. The second skiff circled overhead, looking for another entry. Ethan grabbed a long pipe and smashed a side panel, forcing a blast of steam from the ship's damaged vents. The hot cloud engulfed the nearest raider, making him scream and stumble. Ethan's shot silenced him before he could recover, but there were too many of them. More raiders poured in from the third skiff, firing in bursts that forced Ethan back. Toward the throne chamber, a plasma bolt slammed into the wall near his head. Leaving a molten scar in the metal, he ducked into the chamber. "Breathing hard, Your Majesty? Any chance your ship has working defense turrets?" Her expression was grim. "Only if the power grid is fully restored." Ethan muttered something under his breath. Restoring the grid meant leaving the barricade. It meant exposing himself. Sarathia's eyes met his. "I can hold them off for a moment," she said. Reaching for a weapon mounted on the wall, a Zevrok plasma staff, Ethan hesitated, then nodded. He sprinted down the corridor toward the main power controls while behind him. The Queen's staff hummed to life with a deep, dangerous thrum. The corridors shook with the sound of her strikes each time the staff connected. A burst of light lit the hallway, followed by the screams of raiders. Ethan reached the main console, fingers flying over the alien controls. The repaired conduits pulsed bright blue. And one by one, the defense turrets outside roared to life. A rain of plasma fire raked the sand outside, cutting down the remaining raiders in seconds. The air filled with smoke and the smell of scorched metal. The surviving skiffs turned sharply, engines whining as they fled into the distance. Ethan jogged back into the throne chamber to find Sarathia leaning on her staff. Breathing hard, her armor was scorched in places, but her eyes were bright. "You fight like a soldier," she said simply. "Not anymore," Ethan replied, sliding his pistol back into its holster. "I just don't like uninvited guests." She studied him for a long moment before finally saying, "Perhaps I was wrong about humans." Ethan gave a tired half-smile. "We'll see about that." Outside, the last traces of the storm faded, leaving only the silent dunes. Inside, the ships. Defenses stood ready again, but both of them knew the raiders would talk, and the next visitors might be far more dangerous. The raiders were gone, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the battle itself. Smoke still lingered in the corridors, the scent of scorched sand and metal drifting through the throne chamber. Ethan stood by the console, his hands resting. On the edge, catching his breath, Queen Sarathia leaned on her plasma staff, her violet eyes locked on him with an unreadable expression. "You defended my ship as if it were your own," she said slowly. Ethan shrugged. "I was defending myself, too." "That does not explain why you stayed," she countered, her voice sharp but quieter than before. "Most scavengers would have run when they saw those skiffs." Ethan glanced at her, his tone flat. "I'm not most scavengers for." A moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the steady hum of the damaged power core. Finally, Sarathia straightened, setting the staff aside. "If we are to survive what is coming, this ship must be at full strength," she said. Ethan nodded. "Then I need full access to your systems." Her eyes narrowed instantly. "Full access means control of my vessel," she said coldly. "No human has ever touched the core systems of a Zevrock flagship and lived." Ethan met her gaze without flinching. "Then you'll have to decide if you trust me, or if you'd rather wait for the next set of raiders to finish the job." The air between them tightened. Sarathia took a slow step closer, her tall form casting a shadow over him. "You understand, human, that with a single command, I could end your life where you stand." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "Yeah, but you won't, not yet." Her eyes studied his face as if trying to read the truth hidden in his calm. Then she turned away, walking toward the central console at the back of the chamber. The ship's AI activated with a low, resonant tone, speaking in the Zevrock language. A holographic lock formed above the console, a DNA seal, shimmering in silver light. "This," she said, gesturing toward it, "is the key to the heart of my ship. It responds only to my genetic code." She paused, her gaze flicking back to him. "If I share it, you will have the power to control navigation, weapons, life support, everything." Ethan didn't look away, and the power to keep it alive. She stared at him for a long moment, then extended her hand over the lock. A thin needle of light scanned her palm, the seal flaring bright before splitting into two halves. One half hovered toward Ethan, stopping inches from his chest. "Touch it," she ordered. Ethan hesitated only a second before placing his hand into the light. It pulsed once, burning faintly against his skin, then sank into his palm, leaving behind a faint mark like a silver scar. The AI's voice shifted to a neutral tone, acknowledging both of them as command users. Sarathia's gaze lingered on him. "You now hold more power than any human before you," she said. "Do not betray me." Ethan smirked faintly. "Not my style." With the seal shared, Ethan moved to the engineering deck. He could now bypass locked systems, opening panels that had refused his touch before. Conduits hummed louder. Automated repair drones reactivated, and backup reactors came online. The ship was waking up. Piece by piece, from the upper platform, Sarathia watched him work. Her pride told her she had taken a dangerous risk, but another part of her, the part that had seen him fight, fix, and protect without hesitation, whispered that maybe it was the right choice. Hours passed in the dim glow of repair lights. Ethan barely spoke, except to request tools or check readings. Sarathia, for all her royal bearing, fetched parts without complaint. It was an odd sight, the queen of the Zevrock Empire holding a coil of wiring while a human scavenger installed it into her flagship. By the time they stopped, the air in the chamber felt different. The hum of the core was steady, the flicker of dying lights replaced by a solid, healthy glow. Ethan wiped his hands on his shirt and looked at her. "She's got her strength back." Sarathia allowed herself the smallest nod. "You have done well, human." Before he could respond, the ship's sensors pinged another contact. Ethan moved to the console, scanning the signal. It was larger than the raider skiffs, moving slower, but the readings were unclear. Sarathia's expression hardened. "That is no scavenger." Ethan glanced at her. "Friend of yours?" "Perhaps," she said slowly. "Or perhaps another hunter who has heard the queen is wounded." Her gaze shifted to him, and for the first time, there was no trace of her earlier suspicion. "Stay close, human," she said, her voice quieter. "Now, if this is who I think it is, we may both need each other alive, outside." The shape of the approaching ship cut through the dusty horizon. It was coming straight for them, and neither of them knew if it would bring salvation, or something far worse. The approaching ship disappeared into a thick wall of sand and wind. The sensors flickered, struggling to get a clear reading outside. The desert roared back to life. Another storm rising faster than the last. Ethan stood by the console, watching. The blips vanish from the radar. Whoever that was, they're gone. At least for now, he said. Queen Sarathia's gaze moved to the shifting walls of sand outside the broken hull. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp. This storm will last the night. Maybe longer. She turned toward him. The outer corridors will be too dangerous. You will remain in the core chambers. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You mean your throne room? She inclined her head slightly. My quarters are the only secure section left. You will sleep there. Ethan smirked faintly. Not sure I'm dressed for royal company. Her lips curved just enough to hint at amusement. You are breathing. That is good enough. He followed her through a half-collapsed doorway into what had once been a luxurious royal suite. Even damaged, the space was striking, curved walls lined with alien crystal. Soft lights casting a faint purple glow, and a massive bed positioned. Under a wide window now sealed with blast shutters, the air here was warmer. The hum of the core vibrating faintly under the floor. Ethan dropped his pack near the wall and sat on a low bench. You usually have an army of attendants in here. He asked casually. She glanced at him. Yes, but tonight it seems I have only one. Lucky me, he muttered, though there was no edge to his voice. Sarathia moved with slow precision, still favoring her injured side. Ethan noticed the stiffness in her steps. The way her hand occasionally touched her ribs. You should be resting, he said. I should be ruling my empire, she countered, lowering herself into the bed with practiced dignity. But we do not always get what we should. The storm outside grew louder, rattling the metal walls. Ethan set up a small heat coil near the corner, its orange glow pushing back the chill. The flicker of light-painted shadows across the queen's face, softening the sharp lines of her features. For a while, neither spoke. The quiet broke in only by the distant howl of wind. Finally, she broke the silence, her tone lighter. Do all humans work as tirelessly as you? Ethan shrugged. Most don't have a habit of fixing alien warships. No. She tilted her head, studying him as if trying to solve a puzzle. You act without fear, even in my presence, and yet you do not seek reward. That bothers. You? He asked, meeting her gaze. It confuses me, she admitted. He leaned back against the wall. Maybe that's the difference between us. I don't do everything for profit. Her violet eyes lingered on him for a long moment before. She looked away. Perhaps, she said quietly, as the hours passed. The warmth in the chamber deepened. Ethan began to feel the exhaustion of the day pressing on him. He spread a blanket from his pack on the floor, stretching out with his hands behind his head. The queen's voice came after a pause. Why are you sleeping down there? Because it's your bed, he replied simply. She made a small, almost dismissive sound. You repaired my ship, saved my life, and defended my throne room. You will not freeze on my floor. He gave a short laugh. You're really inviting me into the queen's bed. Her tone was cool, but there was an odd softness in it. It is customary for my engineers to rest well, and you are. Adequate. Adequate. Huh. He muttered, standing and crossing to the bed. He lay on the far edge, careful to keep space between them. For a while, they lay in silence. The sound of the storm wrapping around the ship like a living thing. But as the night deepened, Sarathia shifted, her warmth brushing against his side, her breathing slowed. Her head tilting slightly toward him, as if by instinct, Ethan stared at the ceiling, unsure what to make of it. She was the most dangerous being he had ever met, and yet, here she was, asleep beside him as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The steady rhythm of her breath and the faint scent of her armor polish filled the space between them. He didn't sleep easily, but at some point, his eyes closed. The storm's howl fading into a distant hum when morning came. The first thing he saw was Sarathia already awake, watching him quietly. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her gaze, something less guarded than before. "The storm has weakened," she said, her voice smooth again. "We can resume full repairs." Ethan sat up, rubbing his eyes. "And maybe figure out who was following us last night." Her lips curved faintly. "Yes, because I doubt they have given up. The storm outside might have ended, but both of them knew the real trouble was still on its way, and for the first time, Ethan wondered if he was ready for what being the Queen's only ally would really mean. The storm had left the desert quiet, but the silence felt uneasy. Ethan stood at the engineering deck, his hands deep inside an open power conduit. Sparks danced along the edges as he fused the final lines together, the low hum of the ship's systems had grown into a steady thrum. It was like hearing a wounded animal breathe freely again. Above him, the Queen's voice came over the intercom. Smooth and firm. "Status. Human." Ethan tightened the last connection. "She's ready." "Your Majesty." The deck vibrated as the secondary reactors came online, feeding power into the main core. Lights flared to life in every corridor. The dull emergency glow replaced by a clean, bright shine. Queen Sarathia entered the deck, her steps confident. Despite her healing wounds, she stopped beside him, looking over the revived control panels. For a moment, she didn't speak, just stood there with her arms folded, watching the readings climb. Then, quietly, she said, "You have done what my own engineers would have taken weeks to achieve." Ethan smirked. "Guess I'm good at my job." Her lips curved faintly, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "Activate the flight systems," she ordered. Ethan moved to the pilot's console, his fingers gliding over alien controls he had only begun to understand. With a deep rumble, the ship's massive engines roared awake, the sound rolling through the hull like distant thunder. Dust and sand exploded outward as the vessel lifted from its half-buried grave. From the viewport, the dunes fell away beneath them, the desert stretching endlessly in every direction. The ship's shadow swept across the sand, growing smaller as they climbed higher into the pale sky. Ethan glanced over his shoulder. "Oh, it feels good to see her fly again," Sarathia's eyes stayed on the view, but her voice was softer when she replied, "It feels right," as they broke through the upper atmosphere. Ethan checked the long-range scanners. The horizon was clear until a flicker appeared on the edge of the display. He tapped the screen, narrowing the signal. It was the same signature they had seen before the last storm, moving steadily toward them. "They're back," he said, his tone flat. Sarathia moved closer to the console, her expression hardening. "That is no scavenger ship," she said. "It's a Zevrock hunter." Ethan frowned. "One of yours?" "Not anymore," she replied coldly. "Loyalists who believe a weakened queen should be replaced." The hunter craft was faster than most warships, closing the gap with every second. Ethan's fingers flew over the controls, rerouting power to the engines. "Any weapons online?" "Forward cannons at 70%, Sarathia said. "Already moving to the weapons station." Ethan nodded. 70's better than 0. The hunter ship sent out a comm signal, a harsh metallic voice in the Zevrock tongue. Ethan didn't understand the words, but the Queen's jaw tightened. "They are demanding I surrender, alive or dead." Ethan leaned back. "I'm guessing you're not going to do either." Her eyes glinted. "Correct." The hunter ship opened fire, plasma bursts streaking past their hull. Ethan rolled the ship sharply to the left, the engines growling. "Under the sudden maneuver, you handle the flying, I'll handle the killing," Sarathia said, her hands moving with deadly precision over the weapons controls. Twin beams of blue light lanced out from the ship's forward cannons, striking the hunter's shields and making them flare bright. The two ships danced across the upper atmosphere, trading fire. Ethan's focus narrowed to the controls, his every move anticipating the enemy's next strike. Sarathia's voice was steady, calling out firing solutions and shield readouts, despite the chaos. There was a strange rhythm between them, pilot and gunner moving as if they had done this before. A lucky hit from the hunter scorched their port wing, alarms flashing across the console. Ethan cursed under his breath, compensating with a sudden dive into the cloud cover. The hunter followed, but their visibility dropped in the dense vapor now. Sarathia commanded, firing a concentrated blast straight through the cloud. The shot slammed into the hunter's engines, sending it spinning out of control. Ethan pulled them clear of the clouds, watching the crippled ship fall away toward the desert far below. It wouldn't be destroyed, but it would be grounded for a while. Sarathia stood at the weapons station, breathing steady, her eyes fixed on the fading shape. "They will return," she said simply. "Then we'll be ready," Ethan replied. The Queen's gaze shifted to him, and for a brief moment, there was no distance between ruler and scavenger. "You are wasted on the ground, human," she said, her tone almost thoughtful. Ethan chuckled. "Don't worry, I'm starting to like the view up here." The ship leveled out, the hum of the engines now strong and constant. They had survived raiders, storms, and a Zevrock hunter. But both of them knew the game had changed. The galaxy would soon know the Queen was alive again, and with her, the strange human who now stood at her side. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the ship's viewport. Ethan leaned back in the pilot's chair, his eyes scanning the readings on the console. The hum of the engines was steady now, the vibration beneath his boots a reminder that the Queen's warship was truly alive again for the first time since he'd found her buried in the desert. There was no immediate crisis, no storm, no raiders, no hunter ships firing at their hull. Queen Sarathia stood beside the command seat, her posture relaxed but her eyes distant. She had not spoken much since they drove off the hunter craft. Ethan knew that look, the look of someone already thinking 3 steps ahead. "You're planning something?" he said, not even bothering to make it a question. She glanced at him, the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. "Planning is survival, human," she replied. "My enemies will know by now that I live. They will gather their strength." Ethan folded his arms. "And you want to hit them before they hit you?" Her gaze held his for a moment. "You understand me?" "Well..." Silence settled between them for a few minutes, broken only by the faint beeping of the navigation system. Ethan turned his chair to face her fully. "I'm not your soldier, Sarathia," he said, his tone calm but firm. "I've fixed your ship, because I don't like watching something worth saving get destroyed." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "And do you consider me worth saving?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "Yeah, but not because you're a queen." She tilted her head, intrigued. "Then why?" "Because when I found you, you were just a person who needed help," he said. "And despite what your enemies think, I don't believe anyone survives alone forever." Her expression shifted, the edge in her posture softening. For a ruler who had always been surrounded by advisors, guards, and warriors, the idea of not being alone, but not through command, was something rare. "I have had many alliances in my reign," she said quietly, "but none like this." Before Ethan could reply, the ship's comm system crackled to life. An encrypted signal came through, faint but clear enough for Sarathia to recognize. Her eyes sharpened instantly. "It is from one of my loyal fleets, or what remains of it," she said. "They are requesting rendezvous coordinates." Ethan studied her reaction. "Sounds like good news." "Perhaps," she said, but her voice was cautious. "Or it could be a trap." He leaned forward. "Then we prepare for both." They adjusted the ship's course, the stars shifting in the viewport as the warship angled toward a distant system. The hours that followed were quiet, both of them working side by side to run diagnostics, reload weapons, and make sure the ship's new systems would hold under. Strain, the strange part, Ethan realized, was how natural it felt, the queen of the Zevrak Empire and a human scavenger working together as if it had always been this way. When the coordinates finally appeared on the screen, the warship emerged from hyperspace into a field of shattered asteroids. Among the drifting debris, a smaller Zevrak cruiser floated, its lights dim but active. Sarathia's voice was steady. As she opened the comlink, speaking in her native language, Ethan couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the change in her tone, the warmth mixed with authority. A moment later, the cruiser's captain appeared on the holodisplay, a tall, battle-worn Zevrak with deep scars across his jaw. His eyes widened at the sight of her. "My queen," he said, in a voice full of disbelief. "You live, thanks to him," Sarathia replied, nodding toward Ethan. The captain's gaze flicked to the human, confusion plain in his expression. Ethan gave a small, casual wave. "Hi." The captain blinked slowly, clearly struggling to process the idea of a human standing beside his queen on her flagships. Bridge. After a brief exchange, Sarathia ended the transmission and turned to Ethan. "They will follow my orders, and they will follow you," she said. Ethan frowned. "Me?" "Yes," she replied firmly. "You have earned my trust, and in doing so, theirs." He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with a faint smile. "Never thought I'd end up working for royalty." Her voice softened just a little. "You are not working for me, Ethan. You are working with me." The two ships moved in formation, leaving the asteroid field and vanishing into hyperspace. As the streaks of light blurred past the viewport, Ethan glanced at her. "So, Queen." "Sarathia, what now?" Her violet eyes locked on his, her expression both regal and strangely human. "Now, human," she said. "We changed the balance of the galaxy, that night in the quiet of her quarters." Sarathia rested beside him again. No storms outside. No enemies pounding at their hull, just the steady heartbeat of the ship and the strange, unspoken truth between them. Neither knew where this alliance would lead, but both knew it had already gone beyond duty or survival, somehow, in the wasteland, in the wreck, in the fire of battle. They had found something neither had expected, and neither intended to let it go.